Black single MOM waitress discovers a dying Mafia boss. What happened next shocked everyone. The night shift at Benny's diner was always rough, but this one was pure hell. Customers yelling over the jukebox, plates crashing, the fryer hissing like it wanted to burn the place down. Nia was running on fumes, her uniform damp with sweat, her braids sticking to her forehead. She was halfway through mopping a spilled milkshake when her manager, Rick, barked at her from across the room, calling her lazy in front of everyone. Her hands froze midair as he jabbed a finger toward her, loud enough for the truckers at the counter to turn and smirk. Rick shoved the mop bucket aside, the dirty water splashing her sneakers. He accused her of stealing tips again, said as single mom, like you probably needs extra cash. The words cut deeper than he knew. The laughter from the corner booth made her eyes sting, but she bit it back. She couldn't lose this job. Not after rent was already 2 weeks late. Hey, before we dive deeper, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city and time in the comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story is about to explode. What happens next will leave your jaw on the floor. Let's get into it. Nia grabbed her purse when the diner finally closed, the neon sign flickering like it was gasping its last breath. Her body ached, her pride shattered. The walk home was long, through the back streets where only stray cats and shadows kept her company. She pulled her jacket tighter, trying to ignore the drizzle. That's when she saw him, a shape slumped against a dumpster near the alley behind the diner. At first, she thought it was a drunk passed out cold. But then she saw the blood, dark, thick, pooling beneath him. Her stomach twisted. His expensive black suit was torn, soaked red from the chest down. The man's head lifted weakly, eyes piercing her even through the darkness. He whispered something she couldn't make out before collapsing again. Nia's instinct screamed to run. The alley was empty, the air heavy with iron and fear. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way his hand twitched, reaching for something. Maybe it was the exhaustion of being ignored all her life, the silent cry of wanting to matter, even for 1 second. She knelt beside him, pressing a trembling hand to his chest. The heartbeat was faint, but it was there. She muttered a curse and pulled out her phone, dialing 911. But he gripped her wrist with surprising strength, shaking his head violently. His voice was rough, foreign. No cops. She froze. The word Mafia hadn't entered her mind yet, but something about his presence screamed danger. He was no ordinary man. The watch on his wrist looked worth more than her car. The gun half hidden beneath his jacket made her breath hitch. Still, she couldn't just leave him there. She tore off her work apron and pressed it against his wound, whispering for him to stay with her. He was losing too much blood. She didn't know what to do, so she did what came naturally. She cared. She saved. He was unconscious by the time she flagged down a passing delivery van. The driver cursed, refusing to get involved. Nia begged, standing in the rain, voice cracking. The man drove off. Her knees gave out, and she almost screamed in frustration. She looked down at the stranger, his skin pale as death, and made the choice that would change her life forever. She dragged him, limp, heavy, bleeding, down the alley to the back of her apartment building. Her muscles burned, her arms trembling. She managed to pull him inside her tiny one-room apartment, locking the door behind her. Her son, Malik, was asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling beneath a threadbare blanket. Nia stared at him for a second, guilt washing over her. What was she doing? Bringing a dying man into her home? But she pushed the fear aside and knelt again beside the stranger. She cleaned the wound with trembling hands, using alcohol and the cleanest rag she could find. He stirred, groaning, muttering words in another language. She caught fragments, something about betrayal, something about his men. Hours passed. Every sound outside made her jump. The rain turned to thunder, masking the faint sound of tires screeching in the distance. When she finally leaned back, the bleeding had slowed. He was still alive. Barely. Nia pressed a wet cloth to his forehead, whispering softly even though she didn't know if he could hear her. The storm raged until morning. Malik woke up, rubbing his eyes, then froze when he saw the man on the floor. Nia quickly told him it was someone hurt, someone she was helping. But when the boy pointed at the gun holstered under his jacket, Nia's stomach dropped. She hid it away in a kitchen drawer, praying the man wouldn't wake up angry. By noon, the news on TV sent chills through her. The headline flashed in bold red: Mafia boss Lorenzo De Luca missing after ambush. She stared at the screen, her mind spinning. The photo, the sharp jaw, the slick hair, the eyes that now lay half open on her floor. It was him. The man bleeding in her apartment was the head of one of the most feared crime families in the city. Panic clawed at her chest. She turned off the TV, her hands shaking. She thought about calling the police, but his voice echoed in her head. No cops. She thought about running, but where? With what money? Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and watched his chest rise and fall, her mind a hurricane of fear and curiosity. Who had done this to him? Why had he ended up behind her diner? By the time the sun set again, the knock on the door came. Slow, heavy, the kind that made your soul freeze before your brain even caught up. Nia pressed a finger to her lips, signaling Malik to stay quiet. She crept closer to the door, heart pounding. A shadow moved beneath the crack. Then a voice, low, sharp, calling out a name. Lorenzo. Her blood ran cold. They were looking for him. She glanced back at the man on her floor. His eyes were open now, hazy but alert. He tried to speak, but she motioned for silence. The knocking grew louder, turning into pounding. The neighbors would hear soon. She had to think fast. Her eyes darted to the old basement door. Maybe she could hide him there, just long enough for whoever it was to leave. She grabbed his arm, whispering for him to move, praying he could. He gritted his teeth, the pain tearing through him, but he moved. She half-dragged, half-carried him to the basement steps as the pounding turned into shouting. A voice outside said something about debts, about loyalty, about finishing what they started. The world spun for Nia. Whoever was out, there wasn't the police. They were the ones who'd done this. The killers had come back to finish the job, and she had the target hiding right beneath her feet. Lorenzo's breath was ragged as she helped him down, his hand clutching hers with unexpected strength. She locked the door above them and held her son close, whispering to stay silent. Every creak in the wood above made her flinch. She waited, heart pounding, praying the danger would pass. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Because somewhere in that dark basement, the dying man who had once ruled the city opened his eyes and whispered her name. Nia froze when she heard her name fall from his lips. It wasn't possible. She had never seen this man before in her life, yet the way he whispered it, like he'd known her all along, made her blood run cold. The room was silent except for the sound of rain dripping through the cracks in the old basement windows. Malik clung to her leg, eyes wide with confusion. She whispered for him to stay behind her and took a step closer to Lorenzo. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale, but his eyes burned with something fierce beneath the pain. She wanted to ask how he knew her name, but the footsteps above cut her short. Heavy boots, 2 sets pacing back and forth. Then came a voice, thick with an Italian accent, shouting to open the damn door before they broke it down. Nia's heart thundered in her chest. She grabbed an old hammer from the tool rack beside the stairs, motioning for Malik to stay quiet. The knob rattled. The men were trying to force their way in. Lorenzo stirred again, pushing himself up with a low groan, whispering something she couldn't hear. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. His hand caught her wrist, gripping it tight. He pointed to the far corner of the basement, an old crawl space she barely remembered existed. Without thinking, she dragged him there, pain shooting up her arms as she tried to move his heavy frame. She covered him with a torn blanket and old boxes just as the door above creaked open. Voices filled the basement. 2 men, one tall with a rasping tone, the other quiet but sharp. They scanned the room, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Nia held her breath, gripping Malik so tight he whimpered softly. One of the men stopped near the stairs, his light sweeping dangerously close to where Lorenzo was hidden. Nia's heart felt like it was going to burst. The man muttered that they must have missed him, that the boss couldn't have gotten far bleeding like that. The other cursed, kicking a box. They talked about cleaning up the mess before the cops got a whiff of it. Nia waited until their footsteps faded. The basement door slammed shut, and silence rushed back in. Her legs gave out, and she sat there trembling, trying not to break apart. Malik whispered if the bad men were gone, and she nodded, even though she wasn't sure. She turned toward Lorenzo, who was breathing heavily but alive. His eyes locked on hers, calm despite the chaos. He told her, voice low and raw, that they were his men once, but not anymore. That betrayal had found its way inside his own family. Nia didn't know what to believe. Her hand shook as she pressed a damn cloth against his wound again. She told him he needed a doctor, but he just shook his head, eyes sharp even through the pain. He said he couldn't go to a hospital, couldn't trust anyone outside those walls. Then he looked at Malik, who stood in the corner watching. Something in Lorenzo's expression softened, a flicker of humanity she hadn't expected from a man like him. He asked if Malik was her son. She nodded, tried to ignore the lump in her throat. Hours passed before Nia dared to go upstairs. The diner had reopened by morning, but she couldn't go back. Not after what had happened. She had blood on her floor, a wanted man in her basement, and killers sniffing around the neighborhood. Still, she needed supplies, food, bandages, something to keep him alive. She left Malik with instructions not to open the basement door for anyone. The streets felt heavier than usual, every car that passed making her flinch. She stopped at the pharmacy, keeping her head down. On the TV above the counter, the news anchor was still talking about Lorenzo DeLuca, Mafia leader presumed dead after a shootout. Her pulse spiked. Presumed dead. When she got back, the apartment was too quiet. She rushed inside, calling Malik's name. He appeared from the corner, unharmed, pointing toward the basement door. Lorenzo had woken up again. She hurried down and found him sitting up, pale but alert, cleaning his wound with the alcohol she'd left. He looked at her with that same unreadable stare. Then he said something that made her heart stop. He told her she had saved a man no one else dared to cross. That he owed her a debt he intended to repay. She told him she didn't want anything, just for him to leave when he could walk again. But he smiled faintly, shaking his head. He said once someone saved his life, they were family. And family meant protection, even from the devil's hunting in the dark. That night, she barely slept. She sat by the door, hammer in hand, listening to every sound outside. When a knocking came again, softer this time, she jumped. She peeked through the curtain. It was Rick, her manager from the diner. Her blood boiled. She opened the door only enough to tell him she quit. But his grin made her stomach twist. He said he knew what she'd done last night, that he saw her dragging someone into her building. He said he wanted to know who. Nia froze, heart racing. Rick leaned closer, voice low and greasy, saying maybe they could work out a deal. He mentioned men coming around asking questions earlier that morning. Men who didn't look like police. She slammed the door in his face, locking it twice. She pressed her back against it, shaking. He knew. They all knew. Lorenzo appeared at the top of the basement stairs, moving slow but steady. He told her not to be afraid, that men like Rick were insects. They talked loud but died quiet. There was a fire in his eyes now, something awake and dangerous. Nia tried to tell him not to get involved, that she didn't want violence in her home. But he said it wasn't about violence, it was about respect. And the next time someone disrespected her, she'd never have to lift a finger again. 2 nights later, Rick disappeared. No one saw him after closing time. The police came asking questions around the building, and Nia played dumb, saying she hadn't seen him in days. Inside, she was torn, fear clashing with relief. When she looked at Lorenzo, she didn't need to ask. His silence was answer enough. He healed fast, too fast for someone who'd been dying on her floor a week ago. One evening, he was standing by the window, staring out at the city lights, when he told her that his men had betrayed him for money, that he'd built his empire on loyalty, but loyalty had turned to greed. He said he wasn't going back. Not yet. Not until he knew who had sold him out. And then he turned to her, asking if she'd help him blend in, stay hidden until it was time to act. She wanted to say no, to tell him she had a child to protect, a life too fragile for gang wars and bullets. But when she saw him touch his chest, right where she'd patched him up, she realized he wasn't just asking for a favor. He was giving her a choice, to stand with him or against him. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Malik, playing quietly with his toy car, and then back at the man who had brought danger in her home, but also, somehow, safety she'd never known. For years, she'd been invisible, at the diner, on the street, even to the world. But for the first time, someone powerful saw her, respected her, needed her. So she nodded, her voice steady even though her hands shook. She told him, if she was going to help, it had to be on her terms. No blood, no threats near her boy. Lorenzo smiled, a real smile this time. He promised her that. Then he said one sentence that made the air in the room grow heavy. He said, "Nia, you didn't just save me. You changed everything." And as the night swallowed the city, the sound of engines roared in the distance, black cars rolling slow through the streets. The hunters were coming again, but this time, Lorenzo wasn't the prey. The rumble of engines outside grew louder, a low thunder rolling through the narrow street until the light from the windows began to flicker against the movement of shadows. Nia stood frozen near the window, one hand pressed against the wall, her heart pounding so loud she swore the men outside could hear it. Lorenzo didn't move. He stood tall now, back straight, no trace of weakness left in him. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes burned with an old kind of fury. He told her to take Malik and stay in the back room no matter what she heard. Nia shook her head, whispering that she wasn't leaving him alone, but the look he gave her said it wasn't a request. She gathered Malik, who clung to her hand, eyes wide and trembling. The moment she closed the door behind them, the silence broke. A knock came, slow and deliberate. Then another. The voice that followed was smooth, almost polite, but it carried weight, the kind that made weaker men obey. They said they came looking for Lorenzo DeLuca, that they were only there to talk. Nia held Malik close, every muscle tight, while through the crack in the door she saw Lorenzo step forward, unarmed, expression unreadable. He opened the front door just enough to see the faces on the porch. There were 3 men in dark suits, one older with slicked back hair and a faint scar across his cheek. They smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach their eyes. The older man called him brother. He said the family was worried. That word on the street claimed Lorenzo was dead. He wanted to see for himself if the ghost was real. Lorenzo didn't blink. He said the family had done more than worry. They'd buried him alive. The older man's smile faltered. Then he said Lorenzo should have stayed buried. Nia could feel it in her bones before it happened. The shift in the air, the tension snapping like a wire. The sound of gunfire erupted, deafening and close. She grabbed Malik and dropped to the floor, covering his ears as the apartment shook. Furniture splintered, glass shattered, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. She couldn't see Lorenzo, only the flashes of light reflecting off the walls. Then silence. She waited, holding her breath. Lorenzo's footsteps were steady when he appeared again, blood on his shirt, but his face cold as stone. He told her to get Malik and pack a bag. She asked where they were going, and he said somewhere safe, somewhere his enemies couldn't find them until it was time. He moved through the house quickly, burning papers, erasing any trace of his stay. When she hesitated, he met her eyes and told her this wasn't just about him anymore. If they knew she helped him, she was already a target. They left through the back door, just before more cars arrived. Lorenzo led them through alleyways, his steps precise even though he was still healing. He moved like a man born for chaos, always aware, always 2 steps ahead. They reached an old mechanic's shop at the edge of the city where a black SUV waited. A younger man got out when he saw Lorenzo, his face pale like he'd seen a ghost. He called him boss and said everyone thought he was gone. Lorenzo just nodded, told him to drive. Nia sat in the back seat with Malik asleep against her shoulder. The city lights blurred as they sped away, and she stared at Lorenzo's reflection in the window. He didn't look like the dying man she'd found anymore. He looked like power, controlled, dangerous alive. She wondered what kind of life he had lived to make men fear him this much. He caught her looking and told her she didn't have to be afraid of him. She said she wasn't, but they both knew fear wasn't the word for what she felt. They stopped at a large estate miles outside the city. It looked abandoned from the outside, but the inside told another story. Guards, cameras, the faint hum of hidden life. Lorenzo said it was one of his safe houses. He told her to rest, to let him handle everything. But Nia couldn't sleep. She sat awake, staring out the window as the sunrise painted the sky. She thought about her life before this. Working doubles at the diner, counting every dollar, try to keep Malik fed and happy. Now she was standing in the middle of a world she never asked for, one that didn't care about rules or mercy. Lorenzo came in quietly, wearing a clean shirt, his wound neatly bandaged. He said he'd taken care of the men who came for him. That word would spread fast, and more would follow. He looked tired, but not weak. He told her he'd understand if she wanted to leave, but if she stayed, she had to trust him completely. Nia stared at him, then asked why he was doing this. Why not just disappear and let it all end? His jaw tightened, and he said he'd already disappeared once, and it nearly killed him. Now he wanted to end what was left of the DeLuca Empire before it destroyed everything in its path. He walked to the window, his voice softer now. He said there were things he had done that could never be forgiven, but somehow, when she dragged him off the street, bleeding and half dead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. She told him hope wasn't something people like them could afford, but he just smiled and said maybe that was exactly why it mattered. Days passed, and Nia started to see another side of him. The way he spoke to Malik like he was worth listening to. The way he fixed the lock on the door himself, instead of ordering someone else to do it. One night, Malik asked if he was a superhero because he saved them from the bad man. Lorenzo just laughed, a deep, rough sound, and said maybe once he was the bad man. But peace never lasted in his world. One evening, one of his men came running in, breathless and afraid. He said there was movement in the city, that Lorenzo's brother had taken over everything, clubs, docks, money, and was using his name to do it. Worse, he had the police in his pocket. Lorenzo's face went still. He said quietly that his brother had crossed the final line. He told Nia he had to go back, that the only way to end it was to face his brother himself. She said it was suicide, that she couldn't let Malik lose the only person who'd kept them safe. He told her she was stronger than she thought, that she had survived worse than any of his men ever could. But she saw it in his eyes. He wasn't planning to come back. When he turned to leave, she grabbed his arm. She told him if he went, he wouldn't go alone. He tried to argue, but she refused to move. He looked at her for a long time before finally nodding. They left Malik with one of Lorenzo's men, who promised to protect him no matter what happened. The drive into the city was silent, but the tension was thick. Lorenzo loaded his gun without looking away from the road. Nia sat beside him, hands trembling, but her eyes were steady. When they reached the club, his brother ran. The music was loud enough to shake the walls. Lorenzo stepped out first, the noise dying the moment he entered. The men inside froze, disbelief painted on their faces. And at the center of it all stood the man who had betrayed him, his own blood, smiling like the devil himself. Nia stayed near the door, watching the two men lock eyes. Lorenzo's voice was low, steady, filled with a cold kind of sadness when he said his brother had taken everything that mattered. His brother laughed and said he only took what was left behind. Nia felt the air shift again, the silence before a storm. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she knew one thing. The man she saved was no longer running. He was about to finish what started on that bloody night, and nothing in this city would ever be the same again. The club fell silent except for the hum of the bass that refused to die. Lorenzo and his brother faced each other like ghosts in human skin, two men born of the same blood but forged by different fires. Lorenzo's chest rose and fell, calm, steady, lethal. His brother smirked, twirling a gold ring between his fingers, the same one their father used to wear. He said Lorenzo should have stayed in the grave, that the streets already forgot him. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, eyes burning like coals that refused to fade. He said he didn't crawl out of death to be forgotten again. The first shot shattered the silence. It came from one of the guards, too nervous, too slow. Lorenzo moved like lightning. One hand grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, fired back. The bullet hit another guard square in the chest. Panic exploded through the room. Bottles shattered, men ducked, and the smell of blood filled the air before anyone could blink. Nia pressed against the wall, covering her ears, but her eyes never left him. He was a storm, moving through chaos with brutal precision, every motion exact, every shot deliberate. His brother slipped behind the bar, grabbing his own gun, shouting that Lorenzo was a fool for thinking he could come back from the dead and win. Lorenzo said he already had, he just hadn't finished the burial. They fired at the same time. The bullets missed by inches, sparks flying as they hit metal. Nia crawled low, reaching for a fallen gun, her hands shaking but her aim steady. She fired at the man, trying to flank Lorenzo. He went down instantly. Lorenzo turned, saw her, and for a split second, their eyes met, shock, pride, fear, all mixed into one heartbeat. Then his brother lunged forward, slamming Lorenzo against the counter. They fought hand to hand, brutal and raw, like animals clawing for survival. Each hit echoed with years of betrayal, resentment, and loss. Lorenzo drove his knee into his brother's ribs, but his brother came back swinging, catching him across the jaw. Blood sprayed from Lorenzo's lip, but he didn't fall. He caught his brother's wrist, twisted hard, and sent the gun skidding across the floor. Nia picked it up without thinking, hands trembling, her breath caught between fear and fury. Lorenzo's brother laughed through bloodied teeth, taunting him, saying the Empire was his now, that no one remembered Lorenzo DeLuca. But Lorenzo just smiled, a cold, deadly thing, and said maybe they would remember him for how it ended. With one last surge, he pushed his brother down, the gun pressed to his chest. His brother dared him to pull the trigger, said he didn't have it in him. But Lorenzo did. The shot echoed louder than all the others. His brother's eyes went wide, then still. The room was chaos, smoke, silence, death. Lorenzo stood over the body, chest heaving, eyes dark with something that wasn't victory. Nia moved closer, whispering his name. He turned to her, the hardness in his expression melting as he looked at her. He said it was over. She shook her head, tears in her eyes, and said it never really would be. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sound of police, of judgment, of an ending that had been chasing him for years. Lorenzo grabbed her hand and told her they had to leave now. But she hesitated. She looked at the blood on his hands, the bodies around them, and said if they ran now, there'd be no coming back. He knew she was right. The moment they stepped outside, everything would change. He'd be hunted again, not just by his enemies, but by the world itself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small drive, one that contained every secret, every dirty deal, every corrupt name that kept the DeLuca Empire alive. He handed it to her and said this was her way out. She asked what he meant. He said she could give it to the police, walk away clean, and protect Malik. She shook her head, tears streaming, saying she wouldn't betray him. He smiled softly and said it wasn't betrayal, it was freedom. She begged him to come with her, but he just leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered that some men weren't meant to walk away. Then he turned, walking toward the flashing lights outside, his gun dropping to the floor. Nia screamed for him, but he didn't turn back. He walked straight into the street, hands raised, sirens echoing through the night. The officers shouted for him to freeze. He didn't. He kept walking, every step heavy with purpose. One wrong move, and they opened fire. The shots hit hard, sharp, echoing through the night. Nia ran outside, screaming his name, falling to her knees beside him as the rain began to fall. He looked up at her, blood spilling from his chest, and whispered that maybe this was how it was always meant to end. One last act of peace in a life of war. He said she gave him something he never thought he'd have again, a reason to care. He reached up, wiped her tears, and said Malik would grow up safe now, that she'd be free. Then his hand fell limp. The rain mixed with the blood on the pavement, washing away the last traces of the man the world feared. Days later, Nia sat in a police interrogation room, exhausted, silent. The drive he gave her sat on the table. The detectives asked her who Lorenzo DeLuca was to her. She said he was just a man who deserved another chance. They pressed her for more, but she stayed quiet. When they finally let her go, She walked out into the daylight, feeling the world shift. The city was quieter now. The DeLuca name was gone. The police raids took down every remnant of the empire. Corrupt officials were exposed, dirty money burned, and for once, justice didn't wear a suit. Nia went back to work at the diner, the same routine, the same long hours, but everything felt different. Malik ran through the kitchen, laughing alive. And sometimes, when the wind hit just right, she swore she could hear Lorenzo's voice in the distance, calm, steady, saying he kept his promise. One night after closing, she stood outside the diner, staring at the empty street. The moonlight hit the pavement in the same way it had that night she found him dying. She whispered a quiet thank you to the air and walked home with Malik's small hand in hers. She didn't need protection anymore. She didn't need saving. Lorenzo had already done that in his own way. And far away, in a hidden file that spread through the system, the name Lorenzo DeLuca appeared one last time. Not as a criminal, but as the whistleblower who brought down one of the most dangerous networks in the city. No one knew the truth. No one ever would. But Nia did. And that was enough. Sometimes the people you're meant to save end up saving you instead. Sometimes redemption comes from the most unlikely places, and love is born in the shadow of chaos. If you're still watching this far, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this story with someone who loves a twist. Stay tuned, because the next story will hit even harder.